100 years before we protected our heads, players looked after their groin. So don't be as stupid as old cricketers. Protect your computer. NordVPN is the protection I use when facing cyber short balls or when the rights issue tried to dismiss me. NordVPN will help you get through the straight bat of any GEO blocks so you can watch all the cricket you want. If you need your pitch changed, well, NordVPN can doctor any surface to a new location so your IP address is set up for you to win. Want to buy an associate cricket shirt from a place that won't ship to your country? Select NordVPN. Want to watch a game on a free stream in another hemisphere? Give NordVPN the ball. Or if you just want to watch a clip on social media that the cricket board won't allow, promote NordVPN to pinch it. So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects their nether region with NordVPN today. Morning, everyone, and welcome to the Wagon Wheel, the podcast that answers your questions on cricket. Someone's questions on cricket. Questions on cricket, I suppose. I'm Jarrod Kimber. As always, the best way of answering questions? I don't know the best way of answering questions. I've never quite worked it out for this show. The best way of asking questions is via the Patreon. So it is Jarrod Kimber. No, it's not. I'll start all that again. It's patreon.com/Jarrod Kimber, and there's a bunch of different tiers there that give you different kinds of access. And I think it's the second tier that allows you to ask questions on this very show. Also, if you're listening here and you come all the time, please head over to goodareas.co. We've had an upgrade of recent times. I'm sure there'll be some more changes as well. But, please come over, subscribe to goodareas.co. Plenty of stuff over there, especially if you like the stuff we talk about there. It's probably just written better on the website than it's said right now by me stuttering. Ian says, which of England's 3 young spinners looks most suited to be given a go in English conditions this summer? I mean, I suppose the 2 all-rounders make a little bit more sense. We don't know what Jack Leach is up to. I don't know how long he's going to be out for or anything else. I think if you were going to have an English spinner this summer, they might go Will Jacks or Liam Dawson. But if they do want to try one of the younger players, I suppose you would... I wonder if Tom Hartley isn't maybe the best option of the 3. I think you really want Rayan Ahmed as your 5th bowler. Whereas I think at the moment, if Tom Hartley was your 4th bowler, I suppose you could slip that by. It's a good question, though. But I don't think Shoaib Bashir. Ali says, is there a way to quantify the pitch behaviour after the match is over so that when people look at the scorecard after some days, we can judge performance according to how the pitch behaved? I think CricViz have something like this, but it doesn't work for Indian matches because the BCCI don't allow the pitch data to come out. But for everywhere else, I think CricViz have that available to them. It's not just the pitch, though. It really is, as the ball stops swinging, is the ball got softer? Is the ball wet? What else could it be? I suppose breezes could change. Might stop seaming and start seaming. Yeah. Sometimes pitches just go in one direction, and more often than not they do. But sometimes they kind of change wildly. I mean, this wicket I thought was a perfect example of that. Looked like you wouldn't be able to bat by day 2 or 3, and actually most of the time teams could, or both sides could bat on this surface when the ball was not hitting a crack, and even when it started to hit a crack. So yeah, all those things can be accounted for. I suppose the better way of looking at it, though, Ali, is just the taking the pitch out of it a little bit. You would look at the expected averages from CricViz. Makes a lot more sense because you know which ball you're facing. So it doesn't really matter if the pitch has changed. If this ball is kept, like let's say the Ben Stokes one in the first innings. I suppose your expected average on a ball like that is like 1 or 2. And so we don't really need to know what the pitch is doing at that stage. We just need to know that it was unplayable. And that probably makes more sense when taking in all the context. Ruja says, on Ask George, what are we talking about, George Dobell? Bastard. He was asked about how India drew the 2019 Ashes 2-all. And how England drew the 2019 Ashes and lost 3-1 in India in 2021. and how before COVID, England actually had some fairly decent results. Is it fair to say that Bazball has actually just brought England back to parity with how they were playing just before they stopped having batters in tests not named Joe Root? Or are they even better than that? I think, okay, yeah, I think you wrote India, Rudra, but you meant England. As I don't remember England during the Ashes. I thought Australia gave away the 2019 Ashes, so I thought Australia were pretty poor. I thought England were pretty poor in that series. In the 3-1 result was one wicket when Ashwin played. Akshar and Jadeja didn't play, and Kuldeep, I suppose if you want to throw that in now. And England won a very good toss there, but they were not a good side throughout the rest of that. So if we compare that to what they're being able to do now, I think the bowling attack was probably better at times, during that period, but they didn't have any batting at all. Bazball probably, overall maybe has got them more back to parity, but it just gives them more options, right? If they would have thrown a young spinner in 2021, it just wouldn't have worked. Right, they wouldn't have been in a situation to put any pressure back on India. So yeah, I do think that that is fair. But also, just in general, if you're a good bowling team, you should be. It doesn't really matter if you have batting. South Africa is a very good example of this because you keep yourself in a lot of games. And I think what was happening with that team is it was aging out. Broad was aging out, Anderson was aging out. They weren't replacing some of the other players coming through. And because of that, I think, and because of the lack of runs, I think even when Anderson and Broad were good, they probably weren't getting, especially overseas, they weren't getting as many overs out of them and they weren't getting the same kind of impact. And if you go back to that 2021, they had Moeen Ali and they had Jack Leach available for them at that stage, right? They've just done, they've got the same result here on while still playing clearly much better cricket with Shoaib Bashir, Tom Hartley, Ryan Ahmed. I think that tells you that this is a better side. But yeah, I said this. We all got excited after the first 7 test matches. And before this series, I put up a graphic that showed that since then, when they lost that test to New Zealand that they shouldn't have won, there's been a regression, right? I don't think everyone else had noticed the regression as much, but it was clear that this was not as strong a team as we had once looked at or once thought. It's still a bunch of flawed players, but they found a way to give themselves a chance. They could have been 2-2 in this series, right? That last team, I don't think that last team ever would have been 2-2 in a series like this. Richard says, picking from the 500 Test Wicket Club, make a 5-man T20 bowling attack. I would pick Murali, Kumble, McGrath, Ashwin. I'm not sure I would pick as my second seamer or my fourth spinner. Who do you have? Okay. Would you have Murali over Warne? Depends if Murali could bowl the Doosra. If you can't bowl the Doosra, you probably prefer to have Warne because Warne would still be able to bowl the wrong end for you. You would certainly have McGrath. Wouldn't have Anderson. You wouldn't have Broad. Do you have Walsh? Probably makes more sense, doesn't he, in that lineup? So I think that's the right one. In ODIs, maybe in ODIs, I'd have to go back and have a look. I think Jimmy Anderson has a pretty good record in ODIs, doesn't he? Am I remembering that correctly? He let's have a look. 194 ODIs, bowling average 29. No, not as good as I remembered. Okay, maybe it was Stuart Broad I was thinking of. But yeah, you'd probably be Courtney Walsh in ODIs anyway. And you would probably, Kumble would probably go out of ODIs and it would be Murali and Warne, I would have thought, in that kind of situation. That's off the top of my head. Jake says, do you think the WPL could become the biggest women's sports league soon? It might already be. I feel like it starts less behind football than the IPL did. Also, the distinct windows help too, unlike football. Far easier for both RCB teams to play all their games at Chinnaswamy. Yeah, Man United to watch every man. Yeah, I think that's all fair. It's how it grows I find interesting because it can't go in the other direction. It has to go back towards February and January. Does that mean that it has to be a lot bigger than the Women's Big Bash, which I think is probably fair. But is that going to work for Indian cricket? Is that going to be in the right situation? I mean, I think you make an argument. It almost started as one of the biggest leagues in the world anyway. So yeah, I do think it will be. WNBA has always had its struggles. Women's Premier League is obviously doing quite well. Take away the tennis, WTA and the women's PGA. Is women's European golf big as well? I'm not as sure about that. What else would you have? Netball leagues are all kind of split up. Yeah, those are the ones off the top of my head. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Satchmo says, is the story of the series in India essentially what happened in each third innings? England's third innings totals in this series were 420, 122, and 145, and India's were 430 for 4. Even when England batted first at Ranchi, their second innings lost them the game. I think the story of Bazball is the third innings. And I've been saying that for a long time. I think England have been very, very good in that third innings. And I don't think other teams have been against them, which has given them a huge advantage. And I've talked about this quite a lot. And I would have done it in this test match, but it kind of finished so quickly I never got a chance. So I might do it in the next test match. But I think if you go back, when England have been at their absolute best, it's the ability to destabilize the opposition in that third innings, mostly through bowling. Occasionally through batting as well. But yeah, no, I do think that third innings is really, really crucial in there because they need to set up a situation where they can chase 400, and they also need to be in a situation where they can put enough pressure on that their bowlers can do something. And I know that seems really obvious, but they need to be in that because they're not a particularly good first innings team, right? They're not making runs in the first innings. They've been terrible in the first innings pretty consistently throughout Bazball. I mean, I think I might have done this recently. They're the only team in the world, I think, averaging more in the second innings than they are in the first innings. So they really are struggling when they bat up front. And so they have to be very good in that. And I think India have probably outplayed them. Bloody Bugger says, on the Red Ink episode with Shanaf, you mentioned that the ACB rejected Kerry Packer's Channel 9 bid. In our current world, where boards scramble for every extra penny, this is hard to understand. The ECB had to lobby to remove the designated status of home test matches in England, but it seems like the ACB didn't even have this kind of hurdle. So why did the ACB reject easy money from Packer? It's not the only one. The ECB and BCCI both had to fight to actually make more money off their cricket. The BCCI used to have to pay to get cricket broadcast up until, 1991, 92, somewhere around that period. So, yeah, you're right. It was a bit weird. I think you've got to understand that cricket was run as a gentleman's club. Kerry Packer was not seen as one of them. He was seen as someone from the outside. He didn't want to wear the blazer, right? He wasn't the kind of person they were looking at being involved with. They also knew a fair bit about Kerry Packer, to be fair. He was, him and his father were quite well known. I think everyone knew that anything Kerry Packer did, he was going to shake things up a little bit, and he didn't really care all that much. I mean, there's a kind of a myth now that Kerry Packer is the man who got cricketers paid. No, he didn't. Kerry Packer paid them because it made sense as a business decision. He then did a deal back to the ACB, and the players went back to being paid poorly again afterwards. He didn't make sure that the players were paid. He cared about some individual players. He didn't care about the game. He's quite, I shouldn't say he didn't care about game. He certainly cared about cricket, but he cared about cricket on his terms, right? And which is fine. We've certainly seen other administrators since then. But yeah, so he just wasn't the right person to come in. I think it's very similar. I work for TalkSport. We still get a comment every day of a test match going, cricket belongs on the BBC, right? Does it? Cricket existed before the BBC did, right? Cricket existed well before the BBC. And I think the BBC did a brilliant job of broadcasting on radio and TV and certainly helped the growth of the game. They don't own cricket. And I think that if you go back, the ABC in Australia had a very similar thing. And I think that was probably another reason. They were like, we're not going to give cricket to this Channel 9 person. We're going to keep cricket with ABC. It's the ABC's game, and the ABC is in some ways even more linked to cricket than the BBC through their growth is really on the back of kind of Don Bradman and everything else, right? Like, there's a reason why the locked bag address, if you want to send a letter to in Australia, is 9994. If you want to send a letter to the ABC, right? It's literally cricket and it's even more length. So I do think there was an issue there when it comes to that. My other thing is, and I have to remember back, obviously, to go back, but my other memory was that Packer didn't have coverage everywhere. I've got this feeling that, like ABC, that pretty much everywhere in the country you could watch ABC, or it's not an easy country to broadcast in, as you might imagine, but the majority of the country could watch an ABC channel, which meant that cricket was available to them. My memory was that wasn't quite the case with cricket at that stage. With Channel 9 at that stage, or the Channel 9 network, or whatever they were. I'd have to go back and think about it and how it worked. But that's my memory of that it wasn't quite 100%. And so that caused some other issues. But yeah, they didn't want, they wanted it to be run by them, and they would look after each other. And I know there's a scene that Gideon Haigh really hates in the film where, when they made the Channel 9 thing, and they've got these like beautiful Cricket Australia offices, or ACB offices as they were at the time. And I remember Gideon writing about it, going, that was like it was like an old carpet warehouse type place that they had their offices in. So it wasn't like they had lots of money and they were hoarding it. They just weren't making a lot of money. They weren't very smart. They weren't very dynamic with the way that they thought about things. It was run like by older men for older men, as cricket quite often has been. And some of the best things about Australian cricket weren't replicated by Australian administration. The way that Australian thought about cricket and the way that it was played and everything else wasn't always like Australian cricket was. And to be honest, all the way through, I remember when James Sutherland was running Cricket Australia, he was, and when he retired, there were all these things about how conservative he was. Like, it's cricket in Australia has always been run far more conservatively off the field than it has been played on the field. And so, Kerry Packer was Glenn Maxwell, right? They want to, I don't know. I'm trying to think of someone else. They wanted someone more. They wanted Chris Rogers. That's not a good example because Chris Rogers is really fantastic. But you know what I mean? Had it been another person, it could have gone in a different direction. And also interesting that Rupert Murdoch wasn't involved. We know that he is a big cricket fan as well, and obviously had a big impact in Australian media. He could have been involved in it as well. So yeah. If one of my funniest stories of when we first started with TalkSport, doing the test matches. So we'd done the IPL for years, and we'd done little bits here and there. But when we first started doing the test matches again, like you're on air and you're commentating, and you suddenly get a message in your ear that Rupert Murdoch is listening, and you do realize that suddenly you forget, because you think of Rupert Murdoch as this billionaire in media mogul who changes warps election results and warps political minds and hates climate control, all these sorts of things, and then he probably also likes cricket. It's the same with Elon Musk as well, by the way. There's so many random people in the world that, really love cricket. And occasionally it's like, was it Hugh Jackman suddenly funded a documentary on cricket? And you're like, you what now? Wolverine? Anyway. And that's not mentioning Russell Crowe being Martin Crowe's cousin. Christopher says, sometimes during tight games, I will check WinViz compared to the bookies price, with occasionally being quite different. Presuming bookmakers will use their own model, whose model would you generally trust more? Bookmakers. That's not slamming CricViz or WinViz or anything like that. But if I'm going to lose millions or hundreds of millions of dollars over a space of a couple of years, or I'm trying to earn hundreds of millions of dollars, I know that my win predictor is going to be a lot more steady with bookmakers. And I know most people who work within the gambling industry don't see WinViz as a particularly accurate model. I have never gone through them, so I don't know, and I don't even know how you would check that. Bookmakers are slightly different though, Christopher, because remember, they are trying to get you to bet. So they're not always it's not always a situation where the odds are, sometimes they will be there to get a certain market to bet on them or to stir interest, right? So it's not quite the same as WinViz, which is trying to tell you what the state of the game is. The smart people I know in cricket, hi Rob, if you're listening, and Jake and some of the other guys I've talked to recently. But over the years, guys from Intelligent Cricket and some of the betting companies that I've worked with, and Star Lizard that I was briefly involved with, and all those, they look at the betting exchange, the Betfair, and there's obviously ones in India. The Indian fans use via VPNs and all sorts of other versions of Betfair out there. But the betting exchange is usually seen as a smarter, more accurate, especially on T20 and ODIs, because a lot of people have their own algorithms now. I would say watching Test cricket via Betfair, I felt it's been wildly speculative and nowhere near right all the way through. But I still would trust that a little bit more. The other thing in tight games is that WinViz really struggles in the fourth innings of Test matches specifically. And they're very honest with this, just because there isn't as much data in close chases and everything else. So it gets a little bit crazy towards the end. William says, if you're going to design a player who would absolutely dominate the women's game, what would they look like? Elise Perry? You'd be looking for someone tall. You'd be looking for a tall left arm bowler. And what would you want as a batter? Probably want as a batter someone who could be powerful but skillful at the same time, I think, as a batter. So you want them to be able to hit a heavy ball, but also exploit the fields of behind the wickets a little bit. Maybe that's a better way of putting it, rather than powerful and skillful. Everyone wants a player who's powerful and skillful. But do you know what I mean? I think in women's cricket, you can sometimes, the skillful players, we have fields for them. The square of the wicket players, we have a field for them. But the players who really have the ability to dominate women's cricket, probably maybe what I'm more saying is that the ability to hit a length ball or even back of a length ball and power it back over the bowler's head, but also when short third and short fine are up, manipulate the ball past them. That sort of combination of the batting. And a left-handed batter. So you want a left-arm bowler, a left-handed batter, someone who gets a lot of bounce with the ball, and someone who can flat bat a ball back down the ground whenever is needed, but also can exploit short third and short fine being up. I think that's right. Aditya says, what is the best exhibition of reverse swing bowling you have seen live on TV or on the ground? Oh. I mean, it's a really good question. I mean, there were some Dale Steyn spells, but I don't know if there's a specific spell. I mean, 2005 Ashes as a team, England were incredible. So Simon Jones would certainly be right up there. I'm trying to think of someone else or something else along those sorts of lines that would work. Wacker, like when I was young, but I didn't understand it as much. I suppose was a Akram swinging the ball both ways in the final. Just from the skill and the accuracy point of view. It's a really good question. I don't know. I suppose it's like saying, what's the best swing bowling performance you've seen? Once you've seen so many, I don't know if I have like one that naturally stands out. I always like this is not the answer you're looking for, Aditya, but I always liked it when Steve Waugh or Shane Watson was reverse swinging the ball. I actually love medium pace reverse swing. I've always found it really, really fascinating when it works well. It's not, obviously it's hard. I'm told it's harder to do when you're bowling a little bit slower, which is the opposite, of course, of fast bowling, of normal swing. But yeah, that's always been one that's probably made that I always remember. Anyway, let's have a quick break here, and after the break, we'll get back to more questions from the Patreons. Wagon Wheel, Jarrod Kimber. If you watch this channel, you'll love us on Main, where we do deep dives into the greatest cricket stories every week at Good Areas. How did Virat Kohli play that shot? What is so weird about Neil Wagner? And explaining the incredible misery of being a New Zealand opening batter. Visit our Good Areas site today. Want to show the world that you not only love cricket, but that you know the game deeply? Well, you need a Bodyline t-shirt. In fact, at Bodyline t-shirts, you can actually buy a t-shirt about Bodyline, but also tees inspired by the greatest players in our game. Head to Bodyline t-shirts today. Robert says, what's the most reliable way you've found of comparing cricketers from different eras, or is it just pointless? What we do now, Robert, is we look at era averages and we look at match averages. So that's probably the easiest way. Neither of them are 100%, but they do give you a very, very good idea of whether the player, how good the player was for their particular era. And then the match averages can be warped sometimes by if you're on a team with great bowling or great batting. But it gives you can understand if a pitch is quite flat or not just by looking at those numbers. So generally, that's what we're looking at doing. And then we look at a ratio, right? So how much better were they than the players of their era? So we looked at it with Kumble and Ashwin. We did it recently, Robert. I don't know if you saw it, but era ratio, Kumble didn't stand out all that much. But when you factored in the pitches that he had to bowl on, and they were very flat pitches, a lot of teams made a lot of runs playing against India in the 90s into the 2000s. Suddenly, his record didn't look all that much worse than Ashwin's. And there was a big swing back towards him. But Ashwin still looked better. And I think that when you go through it step by step, Ashwin just is a better bowler, but there's not as much in it as people would have a look at. Those are two players are quite near eras, right? But it gets harder the further you go back, of course. But I think that's the best way of doing it. Aditya says, which are some of the greatest series batting performers that you can think of? Like, how high do you rate Cook's performance in India in 2012 and Smith's in the 2019 Ashes? They were both fantastic. I think Cook is... I've looked this up a lot. Cook is such a good player in Asian conditions and never really got the credit for it that he probably deserved. Obviously, I'm trying to think of some of the others. There's the Andy Flower one that I've always been really interested in. I'm trying to think of anyone. I think Andy Brown, Andy Flower is certainly one. Mark Taylor, 1989, I think gets slept on a little bit. And there's a Viv Richards one. 1976 Viv Richards, I think, are all ones that certainly deserve to be mentioned. But the fact that Smith made 774 from 4 tests and had concussion and everything else certainly deserves to be talked about a lot more. And I think Smith's on there a few times. And I think there's a Lara one. Let's see this. Yeah, where's Lara? Oh, no, it was Lara was the 6th test. I think those are the ones that instantly sort of come to my mind. I'm trying to think if there was any others. Aubrey Faulkner is another one. It makes a ton of runs in Australia at 1910, I want to say. I think that was a big deal for South African cricket and everything else, but also not particularly easy to make that many runs in Australia. Especially if he wasn't a great batter before. He was probably coming in. His best batting years probably would have been during World War I, so he missed those a little bit. Vivek says, what players do you think are the most likely to form the Australian men's fast bowling attack after Stark, Cummins, Hazelwood? Joe Richardson kind of have to give up on. So you got Spencer Johnson. Why am I blanking on the others? Spencer Johnson's probably the obvious one. I suppose it's hard because it depends on when people retire, right? And when they leave. I don't think that the Australian team thinks there is necessarily a younger player who is going to come in at a similar age to say what Stark and Cummins and Hazelwood did. But those are the guys who could kind of jump the queue. I don't know how good Xavier Bartlett is. I know he's done very, very well recently. Obviously, Scott Boland might continue to play just because he's an older player, and as long as it's still working for him, he might hang around for a little bit longer. I did this list recently, Vivek, but I can't remember. I think someone else asked this. But Spencer Johnson is the most obvious answer to that. And Joe Richardson, if he's fit. I mean, those are... And they also complement each other really, really well. I feel like I'm missing someone obvious, though. Whose name... yeah. Oh, and then what I'm missing is then the Green, Hardy, Sutherland triumvirate, and how it was one of them going to be able to develop into a proper bowler. Maybe Sutherland is the best choice, although he's a little bit slower than the other two. Atityan says, given the penalty of one less fielder on the boundary for slow overs in T20s, does that make sense for the likes of David Warner and Maxwell to bat with alternate hands between balls? That could waste a lot of time in the field moving around. The trade-off in between. Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, I like this. This is really good. Yeah. So what he's basically saying is now that you can be in a situation where the fielding team. This is why it's not just about the fielding teams. I think it should be for each ball. A bowler should have a certain amount of time for each ball to be able to decide that they need to bowl in. But what he's basically saying is because the fielding team is penalised in a T20 game for you having slow over rates, why don't you slow them down as a batter by changing from right-handed to left-hand, which means that they're going to have to change the field. That's a fascinating idea. And yes, someone should do this. It's a shame Kieran Pollard couldn't bat left-handed. Who's the Ashwin? Yeah, let's see. James says, one controversy that doesn't seem to be spoken about much is Australia's tour of Pakistan in 1988, in which a large contingent of the Australian players were supposedly prepared to abandon the tour due to umpiring, though they ultimately didn't. Unsurprisingly, there's very little footage or reporting from this tour available. Do you have any particular insights, info, or thoughts on this? Was it really that bad? Or was it just a standard case of home umpiring? I think the Pakistani umpires I think Pakistan, New Zealand, and Australia were maybe three places that overseas fans felt the umpiring was not neutral and was, I don't know how much you know, James, but the West Indies almost left New Zealand in that series that they lose that series or draw at that series, but the one that they didn't win in 79, 80, that period. So yeah, I think from that point of view, this wasn't a one-off. I think I certainly believe that there were times at which teams discussed this, and maybe it hasn't come out as much over the years, and you don't know how serious different teams were and everything else. But I do believe that is certainly something that happened at least semi-regularly. But yeah, I don't know a lot about this particular one, but there's I suppose the reason we don't know all that much about it is because it didn't happen, right? That's generally the difference. But umpire, I do think if you go back and you watch cricket from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the umpiring is just terrible. It's so much better now. And it's not just neutral umpires, just DRS has helped a lot. And in those days, you had umpires who just would get test matches, whereas now the best umpires are generally at the top level more often. Adityan says, thoughts on the Malaysia Vanuatu wide ball? I have no idea about this. I did see this question, and then I forgot to look it up before I came on. Wide ball. Let's see if there's anything online. Yeah, Malaysia's strategic wide. Oh, I love it. All right. So let's have a look what this is. Exploiting with the scores tied and victory within grasp, Malaysia opted for an unorthodox strategy. Uni's wide ball ensured that Vanuatu's win, but aimed to preserve Malaysia's net run rate advantage, a critical factor for advancing the Super 6 stage. This calculated move, while within the rules, highlighted the loophole in the tournament's regulations that many have argue compromise the spirit of the game. Yeah, the incident left. Okay, yeah. So I think you said in the thing this happened in I've seen it in a T20 competition. You might have said it has happened in IPL before. Yeah, if you're going to have net run rate as the way that it is, teams are going to exploit it. We saw a World Cup game where Australia and the West Indies played, and the West Indies didn't make any runs, and Australia went out of their way to score as slowly as possible. In order to get New Zealand out of the tournament and keep West Indies in the tournament. These things aren't new. I think that was run rate rather than net run rate back then, although maybe it was net run rate by that point. It used to be run rate, by the way, which was even more mad. But if you're going to have this, whether it be, goal differential or anything else, teams will exploit it. You could argue that there are probably better methods out there, and I know I have talked to people about changes and everything else. But I think you could argue that there are other options in the future. But if we've got this at the moment, it's going to happen. Thanks to the kind folks at Flexispot for looking after my office and my butt by sending me their E7 Pro desk that save your favorite desk heights at a touch of a button. You don't have to crank anything. This thing just finds the height that you like and you can work. And their BS12 Pro chair that supports my posterior while I'm recording, well, this ad and all my shows. If you need great desks, especially ones that change heights or the best quality chairs, head on over to Flexispot today. All right, welcome back. Force says, gonna miss Wagner. What are your expectations with the upcoming Australia and India, and who do you think would make the World Test Championship finals? Do you know what? I haven't had a look at it, but John Norman and I were talking about this the other day, and John Norman said that the India-Australia series is really interesting because both, now that Australia haven't won the Test match against the West Indies, and India have probably lost one extra Test match than they expected as well. That Australia-India series, they could cannibalize it. So we might be in a situation where the two best teams don't actually make it through to the WTC finals. But I haven't looked at that to see if that is correct or not. But it shows you one of the many flaws of that tournament, non-tournament tournament, where you have all these different situations where we're not really setting up for the two best teams to make it in already, and then it just gets messier and messier the further that we go. Will says, if India had given past touring sides these wickets, would any of them won a series? No, I don't think so. I mean, there's been a little bit in it for the seamers, so maybe once or twice Australia might have turned up with, Cummins, Hazelwood, Stark, with Lyon. Still only got the one spinner to put the pressure on, which I always thought in 2017 was Australia's problem. Just not, up when Steve O'Keefe was perfect for the ragging pitches, but they probably needed a different kind of spinner for the other wickets to keep that pressure on. But when they came back, maybe they weren't in that sort of situation. But if you go back, Will, and have a look, so Bangalore, my memory of Bangalore, so Australia win at Pune on just an absolutely, really, really tough to play on surface. Australia win that, and then the Bangalore test, it spins a lot, but actually the seamers played a big part in that. Ranchi was when Pat Cummins made his comeback, and that was just really flat wicket, and then the last test was actually for the seamers. So that was an Australian side who had a chance of winning that. So we have seen teams do that before, but I think when you have, and I don't think all the Indian spinners were fit for that, were they? I'm trying to remember back to their lineup in that one, but I think when you have Jadeja, Ashwin, Kuldeep, Akshar up all fit and available to you, the pitches in India aren't going to matter because there's no spin combination in the world that is going to be up. You're going to be able to go up against that consistently. Whereas I think when you have the wickets that are a little bit more uneven, that's the case. But I'd have to go back through all the different touring teams that have been over. Will I have to think back to when if South Africa had a good lineup in any of those. 80 says, great podcast and video on Ashwin for his 500 wickets, and his stats comparison with Kumble was amazing. I just talked about that a minute ago. I wanted to point out one other criteria. Kumble was very well known for his tail cleanup jobs, but during Ashwin's time, Jadeja generally cleans up the tail pretty quickly. As an Indian scarred by the late order runs, I am no way demeaning this skill, but it could be an interesting thing to look at. My guess there, Addy, and I can tell you exactly why I think this is the case. My guess is that is because Kumble spun the ball away from tailenders and Ashwin spins it into tailenders. And there are more right-handed tailenders than there are left-handed tailenders. So I would guess that is the case because there ain't no left-handed tailender that's going to last more than 5 balls against Ashwin on consistently, right? So I would guess that is what it is. Also, the other thing that Kumble gets a big thing is, if you have a look, so Stuart McGill is a perfect example of this. Tail order players don't know how to play wrist spin. It doesn't work. Whereas you do get some tail order players who really play finger spin quite well. Very rare to see that with a wrist spin. So I would answer that instantly with, that's not particularly Ashwin's. It's just that Ashwin is not set up to go after the tail as much as Kumble. But realistically, while it's an important skill to have, it's harder to find players who, actually maybe it's not. It's weird. Weirdly enough, I remember when the whole Mitchell Stark thing, when Shane Warne used to go on and on about Mitchell Stark cleaned up the tail, and it turned out that they actually had a very normal. Both of them had a very similar record when it came to cleaning up the tail and cleaning up top order players. But I remember looking at it, there really weren't that many players who were specialists against the tail. But you do get, and I can't remember where Ashwin was on that one, Addy. But I do remember having a look at that. That Ashwin was one of, that Hazelwood and Flintoff were two that came to mind who just couldn't bowl to the tail. And if that's the case, you do need to match them up with other players who do bowl well against the tail. But you don't want to give up Flintoff and Hazelwood because of what they can do to top order players. NC says, how much direction do bowlers get about where to bowl on a ball-by-ball basis? There isn't as much NC actual, what's the best way of putting it? Like there isn't as much variation between a ball on a ball-by-ball basis that you might think, because mostly spinners trying to land it on the spot that is most dangerous for them and seam up more or less the same. And you might have a certain batter you want to bowl at the top of off, another one you want to bowl at the top of middle, another one you want to bowl a foot outside off stump, depending on that batter's preferences. But you're not going to be told that ball by ball. You're going to be told that once, and you're going to do it. T20 cricket's a little bit different just because the fields have to, play a bigger part in your strategy and everything else. But there aren't that many captains that would give you advice more than once and over on what to do. And those are the captains that field at mid-off and mid-on. Most captains don't field at mid-off and mid-on, so don't give that advice all that much. So it's very, very rare. I've started playing cricket again and working with younger players, and I go up when there's something to tell them. I don't just go up every ball, and sometimes they'll ask me every ball, and I won't even answer them. Not rudely, but I'll just be like, "What do you think?" Because they have to work it out on their own. And most bowlers know what their best ball is. They know what their best length is. They know what their best line is. And that's what they're trying to do naturally anyway. Will says, it feels England struggle when they don't have an all-rounder to deepen their batting lineup. Them and all teams in the history of cricket. Should they have looked more closely at Liam Livingstone or Sam Curran for this India series? I can't imagine. Is Liam Livingstone really an all-rounder? I mean, Joe Root did play as an all-rounder. But in Test cricket, do we really think Liam Livingstone is an all-rounder? Sam Curran, what are you talking about? 10 or 13 overs a match? Is that a big enough change? I think they've had chances to win 3 of the 4 matches with the ragtag bunch that they've had. Not sure using Livingston or Curran would have made them a better side. Addy says, I hope you finally got some sleep. I did get some sleep. What would you say is your best analysis, please? That you're most proud of, or what to showcase? Analysis piece. I love the wicket-keeping piece because I think, I did so much work on that, and it goes back into the kind of history and why wicket keepers have changed and how they have changed and what that means. So I do really like that. I don't know if you call that an analysis piece. I did something on Alistair Cook's opening partners, which I thought was really, really interesting at one stage. Ishant Sharma might be another one, and Neil Wagner. I suppose those are 2 more recent ones, videos. Those are the 4 that kind of come to mind. I'm trying to think if I've done something really good on slow ball. I've been doing this thing on wobble ball forever, which, one day will be released. It'll probably be a book at this stage, but I think that's really, really interesting as well, from those kinds of things. But those are the ones that stand out to me. Ishant Sharma and the lengths is something that are... Oh, Akshar Patel one. Akshar Patel, so another video one. But there'll probably be some on Cricinfo, in that when I first started to get into the analysis, some of the things explained in T20, it's kind of outdated at the time, but it was probably cutting edge thinking when I wrote about it 6 or 7 years ago, that I was probably pretty proud of at that time as well. Christopher says, sometimes during tight game... Oh, I've already done that one. And we've done that one too. That is fine. All right, let's take another quick break. here. Yeah, no, I have to take a quick break here because I need to go off and check your questions so that I can then answer them live on the YouTube. I'm Jarrod Kimber, and this is the Wagon Wheel. NordVPN know nothing about knuckleballs, but they can help you with online safety. If you need a VPN, use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount and 4 months for free. They also have a 30-day money-back guarantee, which is risk-free. The link is in the show notes. So stop thinking about knuckleballs for 2 minutes and go to nordvpn.com/Kimber and get your deal. A few years ago, I tried to work out what my process was for actually making content on sport. And along the way, I realized that I had basically created an online course. So here it is, Fans with Laptops, a course you can do in your own time. And it looks at writing, podcasting, and making videos, not to mention social media and so many other parts of the industry. I will teach you about what to do inside the press box or writing a huge feature. But the important thing is that it takes your passion and lets you make something out of it. So if this sounds good to you, try Fans with Laptops. All right, welcome back. Sorry, I'm on my own today, and a lot of people have done super chats, which is awesome, but they haven't always put the super chat in the super chat, if that makes sense. So just scanning through. Hopefully, I've got them all here. Where are we? DM95 says, your reaction to Wagner's retirement, finished with a similar record tally to Garner and Gillespie, will be remembered in that sort of company. I think he'll be remembered. Well, I think Garner should be remembered as an all-time great, by the way. As there's no one who's listened to this podcast more than 3 times would be unaware. I will eventually do the big Joel Garner thing. I don't know next time I'll be in the West Indies or next time I know where he is, but I'd love to get him to sit down with me as well and talk about his career. And Jason Gillespie could have been an all-time great, I think, if his body had held up. I think Wagner's completely different because I was about to say that. I don't think he's that different to Garner. I think him and Garner's major impact is that after they did what they did, other teams have followed it. It wasn't quite the case with Gillespie. Gillespie's more of a one of one, but yeah, I think Wagner from that point of view. I put a tweet up today of there's I think there's 3 different key parts of Wagner, and if you haven't ever seen my major video on Wagner, it's on the main site. It's still one of the most proud, one of the things I'm most proud of in my career. But one thing that I was thinking about today when he retired, and I'm sad that he's retired, and I'm glad that so many people are remembering him so fondly, because when I wrote about him during his career, everyone was moaning about him. But the athletic ability that Wagner had to be able to bowl the sorts of spells that he did, I think is absolutely incredible. And, we should all, the man was a machine. How he got those sorts of spells out of his body is phenomenal. Then you've got the outlier thinking. It's very hard, especially in cricket, to be the person who does something massively different. You look at Benny Howe's career, and it's just like people will not accept that his career has worked. To this day, there are so many people in English cricket who'd be like, just a rubbish medium pacer. They won't look at it because it isn't what they want. And Steve Smith's batting career was exactly the same at the start, and I was one of those people. In fact, Steve Smith probably has helped me to realize that outlier, to look for outliers. And Wagner, the ability to just go, there's no point me bowling at the top of off stump. It's not my best skill. I'm going to try something else. I'm going to go teeth and toes, and I'm going to become the most accurate short pitch bowler of all time. And I'm also going to work on my, my Yorker and my full ball. And then even as he got older and those skills waned a little bit, he then worked on the more traditional aspect of swing. But he started with this sort of real outlier way of playing. And then you've got the tactical genius. Now, some of this obviously has to come down to McCullum, but those fields, I remember the first time I tuned into one of his spells, and I was like, what are they doing? It was like late at night in the UK. You get that first session of the New Zealand Test matches. It's a really good time. You're about to go to bed. You pop it on. It was before lunch or something. And I was like, where are these fielders? Like, they put fielders in positions that don't exist, right? That we don't have names for. And it didn't make any sense to me. And then I watched him do it again. And I watched him do it again. And eventually I was like, oh my God, I understand this. Eventually, they are going to have to play one of the many pull or hook shots to one of these. And all these fielders are in the positions for all of those shots to go to. Or the fend off as well. That combination, I just think, is incredible. So I hope he has a big impact. I hope he's remembered. There might be a lot of people who don't like him because he really is the person who made the bouncer a lot more popular. And when people just spam the bouncer like he does, especially from both ends, it can get really one-dimensional, right? Like, I think one reason that certainly center audiences get a bit upset with tests in Asia is because of how one-dimensional they can be at times. With and that test match at Lords when Australia and England just bowled bouncers at each other, the most bouncers ever bowled in a test match. Come on now, right? That's exactly the same thing. And Wagner had a huge part to play in that. They were there, his fields they were using, it was his tactics. But also, I think he's freed us from just thinking the bowlers need to bowl at the top of the off stump. And for that, I do think he deserves to be remembered brilliantly. And I'm going to miss him. I've never chatted to him. I know he's seen the video. I've been told that. I don't know how much he enjoyed the video. But I'm just going to miss him. I love cricketers that don't follow the rules of the game and find their own way. And, you partner that with a man who just would work. He just put the work in. Incredible respect for his career. Sorab Javri Music. I'm going to say his full name here because it sounds like he's got something to promote. So good on him. I don't know if you've answered this before, but who do you think will win between the 2001 Indian team, which played against Australia, and the current full-strength Indian team in home conditions? If it was absolutely full strength, I would go this current team just because I think their bowlers are just on a different level. But would the current team, would you have to have Pujara in it? I would have thought. But if you had, maybe you don't because you've got Gill now. But I just think that bowling is Shami, Bumrah, Jadeja, Ashwin, and then Kuldeep, Akshar, whatever you need. I just think it's it's just so much better than Harbhajan Srinath Zahir, Kumble, whoever else was in and around the team at that time. So much more power. It's so much more wicket taking, and I know the batting is better in that but I always would back bowlers over batters in those kinds of situations. But it would be a fascinating contest. And thank you for your super chat too. Amit says, super chat for the latest video, pure poetry. Yeah, so if you haven't seen it, we put a video up on the series so far. It's got a bit toxic at times, and the England comments have caused some problems. I wouldn't say it's an overly toxic one. I mean, I think I've certainly been involved in a lot more. India Australia usually gets a bit worse, but as a neutral watching it, it's fantastic. And I watch a lot of cricket, and I don't always have a bounce in my step, right? Like sometimes you just don't, and the cricket isn't good, and you get to the halfway through the first test, and you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to do 4.5 more tests of this. That wasn't the case with this series at all. And in fact, I felt like a sense of sadness that it was finished. So Amit, thank you very much for the super chat. And then we have a whole bunch that didn't come through. No One Knows says, Cummins has 137 wickets in 34 matches, average of 21.72, 45 strike rate. Is he this generation's Garner? And does that give him an edge over Bumrah and Rabada? I don't know if it gives... So the big thing with Cummins and Garner is the ability to be a first change bowler and still be great. I actually think Bumrah could be a first change bowler. It's just that they don't need him to be... Like, you could actually use Bumrah... Looking at his new ball spells, it might actually work better for him. So I think he would still be as good as Cummins if he was a first change bowler. I do think Rabada, I know they did flirt with him being a first change bowler briefly, didn't they? I can't remember if that was limited overs or test cricket, but he needs a new ball. So it's easier to find bowlers who need the new ball than it is to find bowlers who are brilliant with the old ball and from first change. So that probably gives a slight advantage to Cummins and Cummins and Bumrah. But there's not that much between the three of them, right? Like, if you want to make a claim that Rabada is better than the other two, I'm more than willing to hear it. If you want to make a claim that Cummins is better than the other two, I'm more than willing to hear it. And I think at the moment I probably have Bumrah over the other two. because I don't think there's a place he can't dominate consistently. Or a phase of the game with the ball that he can't be one of the best bowlers in the world. But again, if you make claims for Cummins and Bumrah and Rabada, I think that's fair. I think everyone wants to know who the best is, right? I think the truth is that I heard there's a fantastic podcast, and it was all about, I think it's the top 40 or top 50 basketballs of all time on the Thinking Basketball podcast. It's I think like a 10 episode series. And it's something that me and Andy Zoltzman want to do on the 10 best, on the 50 best batters of all time, and do a very similar kind of thing. And I remember on it, just like one of the smartest things I heard them do was just talk about the range of players. And I think they might have done it again recently too, of how many players have a realistic claim that they could be the best basketballer in the world. And my son is absolutely obsessed with basketball at the moment. And he's Googling who the best playmakers are and who the best perimeter defenders are and who runs the best pick and roll. He's 9 and I don't need a DNA test. We know he's related to me. And he's going through all these different details and he wants the definitive answers. And I was like, but there are no definitive answers, right? And there was a Thinking Basketball might have done a podcast separate to the one I just said, but just on who could be the best basketballer in the world. And best basketballer ever. And Wilt Chamberlain has a claim. Bill Russell has a claim. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has a claim. I think Magic Johnson probably had a claim. Maybe fitness didn't help. Michael Jordan, LeBron James. You've now got 7 players with a realistic claim to be the best of all time, right? And I think about that conversation all the time when it comes to conversations like this. I think all 3 have a claim to be the best. And probably you would have a claim that all 3 could be the worst. It's a fascinating discussion. And I think, obviously writing a book about the best batters of all time, I actually think it allows you to discuss the players better and understand them better and break them down to a point where you can really have a great conversation about them. Rahul with Super Chat says, how good was Pujara as a test player? Was he underappreciated by Indian fans? I think, yep. The second part, definitely. Look, I think he was a fantastic player. I think he found a method to be handy away from home. And before the wickets went nuclear, probably was the best player of spin in his generation. Is that fair to say? Yunus Khan kind of just before him, right? Who else is that? And Virat, I suppose. Younger Virat anyway. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else I'm missing on that. And then Kumar's probably slightly that generation before him as well. Look, I think Pujara was just absolutely outstanding. And I've, so someone asked me before what the best analysis was. If you go back to the 2020, 2021 BGT trophy, I did analysis on Rishabh Pant and on Pujara and why the way they were batting was fine while all the fans were ripping shit out of them. And then by the end of the series, that came again. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes you do great analysis, and then the next 2 test matches, the players make you look like friggin' idiots, right? And the level of your analysis isn't any better or any worse, but that's how these things work. But no, I was a massive fan of Pujara. I think when he retires, I might go back and do a really deep dive. But I remember one thing that I did with Amol Dacey years ago, I think. We looked at whether him batting slow had an impact on batters at the other end. And in general, whether that was a thing, and it wasn't. And I think that was a big thing that was thrown against him during his career, even by Kohli. And it just wasn't, we couldn't find any evidence of a batter being slow at one end affecting the chance of a wicket going at the other end. Natesh says, lots of talk about England's batting, but not so much about their bowling. I don't think that their spinners or seamers are really set up to take 20 wickets outside of England. Welcome to the last 40 years of English cricket. When was the last time an English team was well set up to take wickets outside of England? I know you can't answer, Natesh, but I'm waiting. Yeah, I mean, Anderson just, has been handy, but Anderson and Broad weren't as impactful outside that they needed to be. Chris Wokes is probably their 3rd best bowler, and that didn't work for them. Maybe they had a brief period around that sort of Flintoff, Harmison, Giles period, where they had, a few different kinds of options that worked away from home a little bit better. The 90s, they were pretty good. So what is it? Bob Willis, Botham, Underwood. Did they even, that kind of era? It's been a very long time since England have been able to take wickets away from home. It's funny. That's why I keep talking about it. That's why they're doing it. I do think that people have kind of overlooked that a lot. Like, they know that they need to be better consistently away from home, and they've found a way to actually take 20 wickets in this series at times away from home. This manufacturing of wickets that I keep talking about, it helped them at home, partly because some of the wickets they played on during Bazball were a little bit flatter anyway. But it's really, really designed to make them consistently a threat away from home. Iceman says, what's your take on Sachin Tendulkar? I felt his peak was the 90s, pre-back injury. Post that, he played a risk-averse strategy, accumulated runs. He's barely played any match-winning innings like Lara. Oh, I think he played a few match-winning innings. I think if you want to know the truth about Sachin, and this comes back to the book that we're writing, he's going to be very high, right? I think Shield Berry said the other day he wasn't the best Indian batter of all time. He's definitely the best Indian batter of all time. He's very high on the list, but I actually think between 1988 and 2001, whenever, right? That is an incredible level that he has, but he does it in an era where the batting averages are a little bit lower. And so instead of averaging 60 or 65, like, say, Steve Smith might have, he doesn't quite get that bump. And then afterwards, I think he's more of a above average player, but not always at a great level consistently in the 2000s. But that's an era when everyone makes runs, so his average still looks really, really good. So I think it's fascinating from that point of view. I don't think he's a match winner in the way that Lara was, but I think he was motivated to make runs in every single game in the way that Lara wasn't. But one of the reasons I am going to have him very high on my list, and to be honest, Lara's going to be very high too. But one of the reasons I'm going to have Sachin so high on my list is the fact that he essentially played in 3 generations. And it's really only him and Hobbs that did it at that level. And so I think both of them have to be just incredibly high because of that. Because when you're looking at it for 20, I think it's for like 18 or 19 years with Sachin Tendulkar, you have your nation's great player or an all-time great level player available to you. And for whatever it was, 22 years or 25 years, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I've got them all. We've got them all down. You didn't need to find a replacement player for him. And he was considerably better than than a replacement player had they found one for all that time. So if you think about it from a selection point of view, you pick him in the 80s, and you need to worry about your other 5 batters for the next 25 years. Lara just didn't have that. Just doesn't have that kind of longevity. But Lara was different. Lara played innings in a way that won cricket matches, and I think that is very, very fair and does need to be remembered. And Lara needed to be motivated. And they're different people and different humans. And, I've got a podcast with Kumar Sangakkara that will come out in the next week or so, or I think it might be next week. And we talk about, I tried to get to with Kumar what his motivation was. Every player is motivated in a slightly different way. And even he couldn't quite work out his as much. Some players like to win. Some players like to set records. Some players just like to bat, and I think Sachin was probably more in that kind. Big says, I love the recent double century podcast on the Cricket World Cup. Is there any reason why you stopped in the 99 World Cup? When I started it, I thought I would do one episode on each World Cup and we'd get pretty much through the whole World Cup. And then once I got to 92, 96 and 99, I realized that I was going to have to do multiple episodes. But also, I think after 2000 is more modern cricket, and before 2000 is, especially in limited overs, is the season before. I will eventually do the other ones. That won't be a problem. I'm glad that you like them. I was writing all that to do I wanted to do a kind of history of the World Cup on a video as well. So I was writing the podcast and working on the video, and then I realized that it would kill my video team if we made that video, and it might have been like a documentary. There was so much going on in that story. But we will eventually get to it. There's no doubt about that. I want to finish all that. There's a bunch of stuff on the Women's World Cups that I've wanted to do as well, which hopefully, me and Estelle, I've got some ideas for before the Women's World Cup starts as well. But yeah, would love to do more of that. It's probably a book, if we're being honest. And I know there's already been some great books. There was a book about the World Cup that was really, really good, and I forgot the name of it. But I want to do more from the evolution side of things and the narrative side of things a little bit more than the, this World Cup was played here and this is a fact about this World Cup. Just a different kind of book than the other ones that have been written. Hypercore said, a tall left arm seamer can move the ball and bowl 120 would be almost unplayable for a while. She's very raw at the moment, but keep an eye on Sarah Kennedy. I think Hypercourse might have mentioned her before. Yeah, that was when people were saying, what is your ideal women's bowler? It's just, me and Hypercourse both think the same thing because it doesn't exist. That's why it would be, almost unplayable. And Samit had a super cat. Retro T20 11. Players who have played 0 T20s. Viv, Bradman, Aravinda, Meandad, Sobers, Knott, Capel, Proctor, Barnes, Garner, Kadir, and Harper. Can you build a better team? So you want a better team than that? Yeah, you don't have a left arm bowler, do you? So you would put in Alan Davidson. You would probably have him ahead of Proctor, I would have thought, in that side. You have Abdul Qadir, but you could put Aubrey Faulkner in, so you got more batting straight away. And Richie, or you could have Qadir or Richie Beno. You could have Aubrey Faulkner or Richie Beno. You got two leg spinners who spin it both ways, who can both bat. Roger Harper you could have, but you could upgrade that with Colin Bland or Clive Lloyd, and that's your 12th man. That's just for their fielding, but they also give you more batting. Viv, Bradman, Aravinda. So you would have Trumper opening the batting with Viv, and that would probably knock Aravinda out. And then instead of Knott, would you have Ames or what's his name? The Indian wicketkeeper who played for Lancashire, whose name is like someone a bit more attacking than Knott, maybe, who was also a great wicketkeeper. Trying to think of someone else, but yeah, Les Ames would come in. So yeah, I think I could build a better team than that, but it's a pretty good team. I'm certainly, I like that team a lot. Rupesh says, what will it take for Bumrah to be in the same league as Mitchell Starc and Dale Steyn? Is he not in the same league as Mitchell Starc and Dale Steyn? Like, is he not thought of as better than Mitchell Starc already? I would have thought. Dale Steyn was the greatest bowler in a really bad era for bowlers for a decade. I think Bumrah probably still has a bit to go to get to his level of test bowling, but I think Bumrah's thought of as a better bowler in white ball cricket than Steyn already. But yeah, test would just be longevity and doing it over a long period of time. Bumrah hasn't played many tests. Rupesh says, who's better MV according to you, Bevan or Klusner? MVP? Does he mean? I'm not quite sure what you mean, but let's just go with who's better. Wait a minute, my kids are coming in. Yes?
When are we going to tennis?
Very soon, get ready. So yeah, just having a look at that. Who's better? I mean, in his era, Bevan was incredible, and he was better for longer than Klusner. But if you're talking about peak, I think Bumrah was Bumrah on the brain. Looking at the wrong question. Klusner's peak was better than Bevan's, but Bevan as a batter and briefly a handy bowler certainly had a great peak as well. But I think what Klusner could do, and Bevan was also used perfectly for what he did. Maybe you would bat him a spot or two higher now. Would he bat 4 now? Probably. Or maybe you bat him 5. Yeah, no, you probably bat him 4 now. So, but Klusner wasn't used correctly at all in his era. And part of that was his own fault because he didn't want to be thought of as a batter and didn't want to go up the order at times. But I think if you used Klusner perfectly and if you used Bevan perfectly, I think you would prefer to have Klusner. But over the entirety of their career, I would have to say that Bevan was a better player. But if you're looking through it of lenses of today, it's a bit like, to go back to it like an old basketball thing that we were talking about before, you could make a claim that Jerry West or Bob Cousy was a better player than Oscar Robertson in their era, right? And also that Oscar Robertson was. But if you look at which player would translate better to modern basketball, it's probably Oscar Robertson. And if you're looking at that, like Klusner would translate so much better to modern cricket than Bevan would. But in their eras and over the amount of games that Bevan played, I think Bevan probably had a slightly better career. But that's it for the Super Chats today. Thank you to Rupesh, Samit, who do we have? Natesh, Sriram, and Saurabh as well. And thank you to everyone who put comments in today. We had so many from Patreon, and then we had so many Super Chats. It's getting tougher to fit in just random questions, but I know there was a couple of really good ones that I saw in there, like DMs as well. So thank you to everyone for appearing on these lives. We'll be back again probably later next week with more lives. And then, of course, the scoreboard will be back. But thanks to everyone for their support. Please throw us a like on the way out because it helps with the algorithms and all sorts of things. And if you haven't gone over to goodareas.co, please, goodareas.co, sign up, subscribe for more of this stuff, but without my voice, which some people will like and some people won't.
Occasionally, I also talk about behind the scenes stuff. A huge thanks to everyone who has supported us on Patreon and helped us build this channel. Join our Patreon community and unlock exclusive benefits. Enjoy AMAs, live calls with me, and connect with fellow cricket enthusiasts on Discord. Express your cricket fandom with Bodyline t-shirts. Discover their extensive range of player-inspired tees, featuring cricket legends such as Murali, Warne, and Wasim. With team-themed designs and options for hardcore cricket nerds, they've got you covered no matter what your interest in cricket is.